through studying classical music and looking at the history of it, certain spaces have been protected by the middle class, and that privilege has basically been passed on and perpetuated through education. So these could point to some of the reasons why it's been kept that way and why it's not been widened and made more inclusive.
So, hi, Natasha, thank you for joining us, I say us, but I say us because there's loads of people watching, so it's us, but me really. Thank you for sitting down with me today. So just introduce yourself, let the audience know what you do, and just a bit of backstory about yourself.
Well, I originally started out as a music artist myself, so
Okay.
I've been a singer for 20 plus years. When I decided to have children, I thought touring is maybe not the thing I want to carry on with, so I took a sidestep into psychology to retrain, found the amazing field of music psychology, and really realised that after music it was my next love. And have now since been taking an interest in mental health in the arts, but also the issue of race and racism within music education.
So I did music in school, but that's because I went to a performing arts school. So we had music lessons, and I don't think I necessarily learnt the history of music, but it was important to me. I learnt a lot through doing a music education. How important is music within schools? Because do they teach, is it a part of the curriculum?
It is.
Okay.
It is a part of the curriculum, but it has been smallened and smallened,
Right, yeah.
and there are lots of people still fighting for it. We're really having to hold on to the arts.
Right.
But the issue that we're finding in terms of the black minority ethnic students is that often they're not represented within this already very small field in music education. There's a lot of research that's emerging in the US on this, but really none at all in the UK, that's deciding that within the national curriculum, we basically need to take a more of a social justice stance within music education. And that's quite a new concept, really, and it's not without resistance as well.
When you say social justice, what do you mean by that? Social justice stance, what does that actually mean?
So what that looks like is really challenging and taking a more critical view about the assumptions and motivations behind the practices and the way we're taught things in schools today.
Right.
And really looking at, is that something that is inclusive and beneficial for everyone? And the research, like I said, sadly, mostly in the US and North America at the moment, not so in the UK, is showing that actually that black students are disadvantaged in terms of music education, the way that the teaching is delivered, who the deliverers are, so the ethnicity of the teachers, and also the style of the content that's given to them as well.
Why do you think that is? Is it because maybe they look already in certain spaces and see that there's not a lot of black people in them anyway, so they assume, well, actually we don't need to talk about that because there's not a lot of black people in that space anyway? Or is it just because you feel they don't want to give that opportunity? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's several reasons for it, actually. I think one of them that we can't ignore is how underrepresented the black minority ethnic population are in teaching in general, and music education is no exception to that. Some research showed that we'd actually need 68,000 extra black minority ethnicity teachers to reflect the current student population. So that's really going to have an effect in the teacher experiences as well as content that's put across. But ultimately, the way the curriculum is formed as well, some research is suggesting that it feeds into an ideal that's very Eurocentric, and that there are benefits for keeping that going and perpetuating that. It's a controversial subject and one that not many want to touch on, but there's a research done by a lady called Annabelle. Her book recently came out called Class and Classical Music in Control. And she has basically discovered that through studying classical music and looking at the history of it, that certain spaces have been protected by the middle class, and that privilege has basically been passed on and perpetuated through education. So these could point to some of the reasons why it's been kept that way and why it's not been widened and made more inclusive.
And it's weird that, because like the origin of music genres like jazz is black. Do you get what I mean? So why is it that is not reflective? do you understand what I'm saying to you? And almost as if you can do music if you're black, but we only want you to do a certain type of music. You know, we don't want you, like you said, we don't want you to cross over into those type of spaces because it's only for a certain class or a certain race. Obviously, there's all these hurdles that we're speaking about. How do you think young people who want to kind of enter into these spaces, how can they navigate their way into it?
I think it's quite confusing for young people because I think on one hand we see that black music is having a massive impact on popular culture.
Yeah.
We're seeing it everywhere, and outside of school young people have got role models and people they aspire to, but within the classroom they're not being served the musical taste, the preferences, the style of teaching, and they're not seeing the things that mean something to them valued within the classroom. So a lot of the time they either choose, if they feel they can't conform, to opt out of music altogether. And that does result in a lack of instrumental learning, some of the skills that are valued in certain areas. And that's where you see the pigeonholing that you talked about.
Yeah.
So you're either moved into an area where you feel, well, I do belong there, I'm accepted in this genre or in this way, or you find that you haven't got access to a genre that perhaps there aren't so much of a black representation, but you maybe don't have the skill set to get there. And that started really early on from a lack of being catered for in your school education.
So leading off what you're saying about the importance of music education, how vital is it to the development of a child, learning about music, understanding music? What transferable skills does learning about music transfer into your everyday life?
Yeah, there's lots of evidence that music offers transferable skills. It helps with interpersonal skills. It can help with memory tasks. But I think the thing that's overlooked is actually children should be learning music for music's sake. It's not just to get those byproducts, but there is legitimate reason to learn music, not only for its enjoyment, but because there are career paths that are available to young people. And that's the thing that they're missing. That's the thing that they're not seeing. That's the role models that aren't existing within the school setting to show them this could be something you could do as a job. And for me, that's something that's very important, that I feel passionate about, that we need music education to be nurtured, we need it to be inclusive, and we need people to look at it and see there is a place for me there, rather than seeing lots of barriers ahead of them, which is unfortunately the picture that's painted to them at the moment.
Yeah, because like I said, I went to a theatre school, so I was really immersed in that world of music, dance, acting, and I realised what a privilege that was. Because speaking to friends now, growing up, a lot of them they don't get to even go to the theatre, or because again that's another class thing as well. They try to make it seem like only certain people can operate in those certain places, or if they do take you to the theatre, it's just something that you're just like, okay, what is this? They're not showing you the other side, or listening to classical music, or taking you to environments that you're not usually used to. Why do you think that is? Do you think they just really just want to hold people back?
I think there's a really narrow view of, and a very, like I said, pigeonholed view of where certain people belong. And it's unsaid and it's unspoken. And the bigger picture of social justice in music education is that ultimately what that upholds and what that perpetuates is racism.
Yeah.
And it's systemic racism. And by not speaking out and having open dialogue about these things, we're allowing them to go on. There's a really powerful quote that I read from one of the most prominent researchers on race and music education in North America, called Deborah Bradley. And she says there's an undisturbed and undisputed whiteness in music education.
Yeah.
And if we don't speak about that and address it, we are perpetuating racism. And I think things have just been left to be as they were, and from when things were originally created. And a lot of that is linked with, I think, colonialism and the way that a lot of the curriculum has been pitched, where things have been obscured, important things have been left out. And it's time for us to actually speak up and challenge and evaluate what is within our education system now and say it needs to change. It needs to be more inclusive. It can't stay the way it is.
Do you feel like there has maybe been a shift since, obviously Black Lives Matter has always been there, but in the last year or so, we had, the Blackout Tuesday, which was to do with performing arts as well. The music industry, actually, I think it was somebody in the music industry that started that because of the lack of representation. And not only, like you were saying, just with it comes to artists, but the gateholders, the people that allow people to even come in or allow to contribute. Have you seen a shift? Or do you feel as if all of that was almost for show? Because you're actually in it and you're seeing if there's a change. Has there been a change?
I think there's a shift in respect of people are now looking and they're seeing.
Right.
I think the pandemic has slowed life down and it's silenced and quieted a lot of the busyness that's been there. And the pandemic in lots of ways has been like a mirror that's been held up to a lot of us, to society. And it's really shown us what's there, and a lot of us have been quite shocked at what we've seen. And I think really we've had to take stock of and realise and face up to things that have been there for a long time, but unless it's your own experience, we can be very blinded to it.
Yeah.
So there are issues that we've been speaking about as people of colour for a long time and wanting to address, but we have got a unique position where there's almost some quiet and people can see and people can hear. And I think social media has really helped with that as well, that we more have a voice, that the media aren't filtering out everything and really glossing over certain things that need to be seen. Music's playing a really key role in that. Because with a lot of the platforms that we have today, musicians can present their experiences and their voice can be heard. So we have a window, and I think the responsibility at the moment is that we need to use this window. We don't know how long that's going to be open for.
True.
And it's, as researchers, I think we have a responsibility to gather the data from the voices so that when we're asked by policymakers, by educators, by people in the business sector, in the music sector, what are the experiences and what needs to be done, we can say, well, this is it.
Yeah.
We've gathered the data, the voices have spoken, this is what their experiences are, this is what they need to see happen, and here's the information, what can you do about it?
How was it for you? Because you said you was in the music industry singing for 20 years.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to be able to sit on both sides of the fence as a musician myself and now as a researcher and looking at the academic side of it. And one of the things at the moment, I'm just embarking on research in the UK on racism in music education. And that was spurred on by several things. First of all, to know that there is none to date in the UK. This is really an under-researched area that we need data on.
That's mad.
Yeah, it's time. It's really time. But also my own personal experiences really seeing them reflected and then going back to university after a 20-year career in music, seeing some of the same issues being played out really disturbed me.
Yeah.
And I was someone that right from a very young age unswervingly wanted to work in the music industry. My dad was a musician and it's all I ever wanted to do. Yet I never learned an instrument, and a lot of that was to do with financial situations, and we can't ignore socioeconomic factors. There is an intersection of class and race, and that's a whole other issue to address, but started piano lessons my family couldn't afford for me to do anymore, and I very nearly didn't do GCSE music, even though I knew that was absolutely the career I wanted to do, because I didn't feel I had the skill set for it. I couldn't read music, I couldn't play an instrument, and a lot of that stayed with me. I had one teacher, funny enough, that encouraged me and said, you can do this, and I did music education and GCSE music, scraped through, but managed to have a 20-year career, and more often than I would like, feeling like an imposter and a faker because there were certain skills I didn't have.
Right.
I couldn't read music. I wasn't a sight reader. And this was despite, singing on stage and touring with very high-profile artists, loving my career, but just having something that said, but you haven't got it all, and maybe you can work in this area, but you can't work in that area. Yeah. And a wake-up call for me was realizing that I was undervaluing skills that I already had. Right. Skills that I'd got from my dad, from watching him, from my role models, from working with mainly people of colour in my circles for music, and realising that I actually had so much to offer and I was undervaluing it and it was being undervalued. Yeah. And the key point was when a classical musician said to me with envy, I wish I had the improvisation skills you had. And they said, take the sheet music away from me and I can't play anything. And they really said, I would love to be able to improvise. That's a skill I don't have. And it was a big wake-up call to me to sort of see that not only myself, but institutions undervalue these things that we have, that we can take for granted, that we can learn within our cultures, within our families, around the people that we mix with. And I think it's very key that universities, conservatoires, music education sector widens what they value and the way they assess as well as the way they teach musicality.
Yeah, because it's true. If you're going to go to somewhere to learn, then you don't necessarily need to know everything before you get to that establishment. Do you get what I mean? So you should be assessed maybe on your natural ability, because that's the whole point of going to an establishment to learn, is they enhance what you already have there. What can people do to assist to the change?
I think one of the things we can start with is have the conversation and keep having the conversation.
Right.
We need to speak about racism in every area, and music education is no exception.
Do you think people are ready? Because it's, you know, when you get, these spaces are predominantly white, and on it sometimes, as Black people, we shy away from these conversations because already, like you said, we don't feel like we should be in that space. So we don't want to do anything to disturb or to make it seem as if we're not grateful for being in those spaces. We don't want to be too disruptive, we just want to keep quiet, get our money and leave. Do you know what I mean? Because you don't want to ruin it. You think, if I say something, I'm going to be the angry Black woman now, I'm going to be the opinionated Black woman, or I'm the attitude and I got something to say about everything. But should we just be bold and speak, or do you think they're ready for that? Or are you going to get penalised for even speaking about it?
I think, unfortunately, the problem is that our voices aren't being heard. And in a lot of the areas where decisions are made, policymakers, senior academics, they are very much so white.
Yeah.
There's something like 2% of Black conservatoire teaching staff. It's very, very small. And so a lot of people aren't having these conversations because they are white and they don't feel comfortable having the conversations. And if our voices are to be heard, isn't it so much better to hear them firsthand from us rather than a secondary source anyway? I think what we have to do, to quote Toni Morrison, is to realise resistance is the secret of joy. We can't stay silent, and we have to rock the boat. We have to speak up, and we have to speak about our experiences. And I think that finding the ways to do that in ways that we can be heard and listened to, and as a researcher I would say this, but I think in gathering data, in gathering facts, in getting not only experience but the numbers and being able to present that so it can't not be listened to.
Yeah.
Those are the things that are going to make waves and are hopefully ultimately going to make change. But we have voices, we have experiences, and they're valid and they need to be heard.
What's the reception been like when you're doing this research and you're speaking to certain people? How's that been?
Well, it's an ethical code of practice that you keep things anonymous anyway, but I think that's been very key, particularly in a study like this. Hearing from teachers that are Black, minority, ethnic background is very, again, there's not been a lot of that. And there's a bit of a fear to speak out. Like you said, people don't want to lose jobs. There's already a bit of a glass ceiling effect from moving up in most sectors, and education is no exception. So it's been quite key to appreciate that people will want to be anonymous and to really reassure them of their confidentiality. But at the same time, I think when people know that, people are ready for change and they want to see change and they want their experiences heard. And while we're in this unique position to have some space and to have the floor, if you like, for a while, people are thankfully eager to take it.
I was speaking to one of our guests earlier, and we was just talking about the classical environment, and I was saying, do you feel as if it's not cool, or it doesn't come across as cool, it doesn't come across as appealing, hence why we don't see a lot of Black people in that world? Would you agree, or would you disagree?
I think that there is certainly something to be said for that. One of the things that I've sort of been toying with myself and thinking about when I've been looking at this research is where is the place and what are the barriers in education for Black students? And I think if you are Black and you are from a wealthy family or you're middle class, you might have one less barrier to cross, but there will be other barriers. You're still going to have the barriers of acceptance, perceived or real, of having to feel like that you've got to work harder and to prove yourself, of not necessarily finding yourself in those senior positions. All of those things are going to happen. But I think if you are a Black student and you aren't middle class and you aren't from a wealthy background, there's all the more barriers there.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to have the opportunity to have instrumental lessons, seen as it's not state funded anymore. That was one of the things that happened to me that stopped me from learning. And so there are things that are going to naturally make you feel excluded from that. And I think because you get this picture of that's not for me, whether it's just because I don't have financial access to it or not, or everything I'm seeing in my music lesson is really not like me. I'm not seeing anyone who looks like me. None of the music is like me. Then that's going to deter you as well. And I did an interesting experiment. I was working in a primary school and I had the opportunity to see all years, so 120 children, and I asked all of them the same question. So put your hand up if you like music lessons, and very few put their hand up.
Really?
Very few, very few. Then I said, put your hand up if you like music, if you're into music. They all put their hands up.
Yeah. Because I was thinking, but music lesson, it's so weird that they see it
because there's a disparity. They totally see it as two different things. The music that they're into and that they love and that inspires them, that they have passion about outside of school, is just not to be found in school. So music lessons are almost put into a completely different compartment. They don't see them as a means to get to even the careers they might want to do with the artists and playing the music that they want. It's completely separated. So in that way, to answer your question, that is seen as uncool, because they're like, well, this I want to do, this I'm interested in, this I have passion about, but what I'm receiving in the classroom isn't doing it for me.
Well, thank you. That was, I know we could probably talk about this for hours and hours on end, but if you could let the people know where they can find you and this research that you're doing, where will we be able to find it eventually?
Yes, so it's still very much in the early stages, just all of the ethical procedures are being signed off, but it's being done in conjunction with Sheffield University.
Okay.
They run a fantastic music psychology course in education, performance and well-being there. So it's due to be completed in the summer.
Okay.
My hope is that it will be published, and with leading organisations like Black Lives in Music, we're going to be hearing more about data and research in the future, which is super exciting and something that I hope more and more people will be picking up the baton in terms of academic and musicians and following and leading with that. As it stands, there's no data on the experience of Black professionals or musicians in the UK music industry. With this survey and your responses, we can better make the case for the change that we so need. Please visit blim.org.uk/change.